I, 56-year-old female, have been married to my wife Angela, 56-year-old female, for a year, and we're planning our first anniversary celebration with a trip overseas. I was very excited to spend this time with my wife, but unfortunately my ex-husband Dan, 58-year-old male, recent hospitalization is putting a damper on my plans. Backstory: I met Dan in college and we got married shortly after graduating when we found out that I was pregnant. At the time, it felt like the right thing to do, but looking back, it was a bad idea. I resented having to put my career aspirations on hold in order to be the full-time caregiver, and Dan resented having to be the main financial provider. However, this did not stop him from constantly bringing it up whenever I asked him to help with the kids or the home. He also never defended me when his mother would stop by, unannounced, and the household wasn't up to the Queen's standard. I felt so exhausted and trapped, and if it weren't for my kids Junior, 34 years old, Sarah, 32-year-old female, Michelle, 29-year-old female, and Mike, 29-year-old male, I would have left years ago. Unfortunately, Dan did not have the same values as me and blindsided me with divorce papers. It was a rough process, but after the first year of our divorce being finalized, I got my groove back, and within the next 4 years, I was able to get a nice apartment and good career. Present day: a couple of weeks ago, Dan was rushed to the hospital, and while the doctors were able to save him, his health took a turn for the worse. His wife is now essentially working to provide for their kids, while her parents watch them to save on daycare. I learned all of this through my children, as I do not care to have any direct contact with Dan, but almost every time I talk to them, they always bring up how stressed and tired they are over having to look after their father. I thought I was just being a sympathetic ear, but a couple of days ago, my children came together to confront me about my lack of willingness to offer assistance to their father, and as their mother, I should want to care for him to make their own lives easier. My children know that while I have a full-time job, I can make up my own hours, and they want me to come into his house at least twice a week to make sure he's clean and fed, or pay for a nurse to come do it. I refuse, stating that Dan and I have been divorced for years, and that their stepmom can handle that. That's when they told me that she didn't care about their dad like they do, and is most likely hoping for him to pass so she can collect on his insurance policy as the legal wife. My daughter Sarah then began to cry and asked me if I cared whether or not she had a dad anymore, while Junior and Mike thought that I was being bitter. Michelle asked me to put them first and that I can reschedule my anniversary trip with Angela. My former in-laws are also calling me to say that I need to do this and that I'd be a horrible mom. Am I the jerk? Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Not the idiot. Turn this completely around and ask your children, how long are you supposed to put your life on hold? And are you never allowed to be happy and live your life? Tell your children that between the 4 of them and ex-in-laws, they can split costs of a hired nurse, healthcare professional, domestic aid, to go to your father's house twice in a week. Why should you pay for his care? You don't have the bandwidth and mental strength to be their father's carer, and it's really manipulative and cruel of them to emotionally coerce you to become your ex's carer. Comment 2. Your kids are well into adulthood now. Their father is their responsibility, not yours. That kind of goes with the territory of being divorced. You might try reminding your kids that he's the one who filed for divorce in the first place. He didn't want to be your partner then, so you're not obligated to be his caretaker and provider now. He has a wife. If she can't do it, they need to step up. That is literally what the next of kin is. It's absolutely insane that this is the position your kids are taking. Enjoy your anniversary, not the idiot. Now for the update, thank you all for reading my last post. Since then, things have gotten even more complicated. After my children confronted me, I tried to stand my ground, but the guilt started to eat away at me. I couldn't shake Sarah's tears or Michelle's plea to put them first. I decided to talk to Angela about it, and she was surprisingly understanding. She said that while she didn't like the idea of postponing our anniversary trip, she understood that family comes first. So we decided to delay our trip by a month. I started going over to Dan's house twice a week. It was awkward at first, seeing him so vulnerable and weak. He was always such a strong, stubborn man, and now he could barely get out of bed. His wife, who I'll call Linda, was there most of the time, but she was clearly overwhelmed. She didn't seem to care much about Dan's well-being, and it was obvious that she was just going through the motions. I couldn't help but wonder if my kids were right about her hoping for his insurance payout. One day, while I was helping Dan with his medication, he looked at me with tears in his eyes and apologized for everything he'd put me through. He said he regretted not being a better husband and father. It was a moment of raw honesty that I never expected from him. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and continued with what I was doing. But his words stuck with me. Meanwhile, my relationship with my kids became strained. Junior and Mike were still angry with me, and Sarah was distant. Michelle was the only one who seemed to appreciate my efforts, but even she was stressed out from trying to balance her own life with helping out. I felt like I was walking on a tightrope, trying to keep everyone happy while dealing with my own emotions. One evening, after a particularly tough day, I broke down in front of Angela. I told her about Dan's apology and how it had stirred up old feelings of resentment and sadness. She held me and told me that it was okay to feel conflicted. She reminded me that I had done my best for my kids and that I shouldn't let the past dictate my present. Her support meant the world to me, and it gave me the strength to keep going. But things took a turn for the worse when Dan's health declined even further. He was in and out of the hospital, and the doctors weren't optimistic. My kids were beside themselves with worry, and I felt helpless. I spent more time at Dan's house trying to ease the burden on my children. Linda, on the other hand, seemed more detached than ever. One day I overheard her talking on the phone about how she couldn't wait for this nightmare to be over. It made my blood boil, but I kept my mouth shut for the sake of my kids. During one of my visits, Dan asked me to help him write a letter to our children. He wanted to apologize to them for not being the father they deserved and to tell them how proud he was of them. It was a heartbreaking task, but I agreed. As I wrote down his words, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. It was as if we were finally putting the past to rest. But before I tell you more about that, let me share a bit of backstory that I think is relevant. When Dan and I were married, he was always so focused on his career that he missed out on a lot of important moments with our kids. He was never there for their school plays, soccer games, or even family dinners. I was the one who held everything together, and I resented him for it. But now, seeing him so vulnerable and regretful, I realized that he had his own demons to battle. It didn't excuse his behavior, but it helped me understand him a little better. As the days went by, I noticed a change in my kids. They seemed to appreciate my efforts more, and our relationship started to mend. Junior and Mike even apologized for their harsh words, and Sarah began to open up to me again. It was a small victory, but it meant a lot to me. Then one night, I got a call from Linda. She was frantic, saying that Dan had taken a turn for the worse, and that I needed to come over immediately. I rushed over, and when I got there, I found Dan barely conscious. The paramedics arrived shortly after and took him to the hospital. My kids and I followed, and we spent the night in the waiting room, praying for a miracle. Unfortunately, Dan didn't make it. He passed away in the early hours of the morning, surrounded by his family. It was a devastating blow, and my kids were inconsolable. I tried to be strong for them, but inside I was falling apart. Despite everything, Dan had been a significant part of my life, and his death left a void that I didn't know how to fill. In the days that followed, we made arrangements for the funeral. Linda was surprisingly cooperative, and we managed to put our differences aside for the sake of the kids. The funeral was a somber affair, but it gave us a chance to say our goodbyes and find some closure. As I look back on the past month, I realized that it was a time of immense growth and healing. My relationship with my kids has improved, and I've come to terms with my past with Dan. It's been a difficult journey, but I'm grateful for the support of my family and Angela. We're planning to take our anniversary trip next month, and I hope it will be a chance for us to reconnect and create new memories. Thank you for reading. Am I the idiot for telling my wife to deal with the handyman's mess herself? We both do laundry, but my wife wanted the laundry done upstairs because she dreads going down to our small basement. However, I don't mind. She thinks that the back porch of the house can be converted into a laundry and mudroom. We discussed it, and although I am skilled around the house, I am not skilled enough to build an addition. Hiring professionals for a project like that would be quite expensive, and it would have been something we couldn't afford. Nonetheless, she sought the help of a family member who knows a handyman that works for a low price. I am somewhat against it, but my wife is determined when she wants something, so it happened. The guy did the plumbing work, electrical, drywall, and new siding on the house. I must admit it looked okay, but the problem started from day one. Firstly, there was a leak in the cold water line, and guess who had to call the guy to come and fix it? Additionally, the only advice I gave my wife was to ensure that the guy knows to insulate the piping so it doesn't freeze and break during the cold winter months. She assured me that he was aware. She had him install insulation and heat tape. Can you guess what happened that winter? The pipes froze. Consequently, guess who had to thaw the pipes with a hairdryer? Yours truly. So over the past few winters, we had days with temperatures in the single digits. And guess who stayed up all night running water to prevent the pipes from freezing? Me, the husband. Where was Mrs. Wife while all of this was happening, you may ask? She was sound asleep because she didn't have to worry about it. Who tracked the weather from November to April because they needed to be prepared? It was me. And when I finally reached my breaking point and became upset because it had become tiresome, I told her it's frustrating that I have to handle the mental burden of a project that was her idea. Whenever something goes wrong, I have to make the phone calls and wait for the plumber, etc. However, this past year was the final straw for me. The access to the plumbing is through a small hole leading to a cramped crawl space. We had another freezing incident, and I was fed up. I crawled through the hole only to discover that the reason it kept freezing was because the heat tape was installed on the outside of the insulation. I lost my cool. I told her that it's unfair for me to continue dealing with this while she doesn't give it a second thought. She accused me of blaming her and rubbing her nose in it. I am exhausted. It's all on her now. Now for an update. Wife wanted laundry upstairs, got a handyman through a family member. He did shoddy work, and whenever there's a problem, the husband has to take care of it. The husband got mad, said it was her idea and her fault. Years later, there are still issues, and the wife gets angry at the husband because she feels that the husband blames her. Am I the jerk? Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1, not the idiot. Contractors are supposed to be licensed, bonded, and insured for a reason. I would suggest looking them up to see if you can pursue further action rather than them coming back to do additional poor work. Angie.com has a good place to start here. Comment 2, not the idiot. It is her fault. You warned her of the dangers of hiring cheap and have spent ample time dealing with her mistake. It's perfectly reasonable to have her deal with the problems she caused. Of course, this doesn't actually fix your plumbing problem. Now for the update. Hey everyone, thanks for reading. So here's what's been happening since my last update. About a month ago, we had another major issue with the laundry room. This time, it wasn't just the pipes freezing. The entire electrical system in the new addition shorted out. I came home from work to find my wife in a panic because the lights wouldn't turn on and the washing machine was dead. I checked the breaker box and sure enough, the circuit for the laundry room had tripped. I reset it, but it tripped again almost immediately. I knew this was beyond my ability to fix, so I called an electrician. The electrician came out the next day and took a look. He found that the wiring was not up to code and that there were several fire hazards. He said it was a miracle the house hadn't burned down. I was furious. I called the handyman, but he was nowhere to be found. His phone was disconnected, and the family member who recommended him had no idea where he was. My wife was upset too, but she kept saying that we just needed to get it fixed and move on. We had no choice but to hire a professional electrician to redo all the wiring in the laundry room. It cost us a small fortune, money we really didn't have to spare. We had to dip into our savings, which were meant for a vacation we had been planning for years. My wife was devastated about the vacation, but I was more concerned about the safety of our home. While the electrician was working, he found more issues. The drywall was poorly installed, and there was mold growing behind it because of a leak that had gone unnoticed. This meant we had to tear down the walls and replace the drywall, adding even more to our expenses. My wife was in tears and I was at my wit's end. I couldn't believe how much this simple laundry room addition had spiraled out of control. During all this, my wife and I had several heated arguments. She felt guilty and kept apologizing, but I was too angry to accept her apologies. I told her that this was exactly why I didn't want to hire the handyman in the first place. She accused me of holding a grudge and not being supportive. It was a mess. One night, after another argument, I went for a walk to clear my head. I started thinking about our relationship and how we got to this point. I remembered when we first bought the house. We were so excited and full of dreams. We spent weekends fixing it up together, and it brought us closer. But somewhere along the way, things changed. We started taking each other for granted, and little issues became big problems. I realized that the laundry room was just a symptom of a bigger issue in our marriage. We had stopped communicating and working as a team. I decided that we needed to talk, really talk about everything. So I went back home and told my wife that we needed to have a serious conversation. We sat down and talked for hours. We both cried and admitted our faults. I told her how exhausted I was from dealing with all the issues and how I felt like she didn't appreciate my efforts. She told me how guilty she felt and how she just wanted to make things easier for both of us. We agreed that we needed to work on our communication and start making decisions together again. But before we could start rebuilding our relationship, we had to deal with the immediate issue of the laundry room. The electrician finished his work, and we hired a contractor to fix the drywall and address the mold problem. It took a few weeks, but finally, the laundry room was safe and functional again. The financial strain was still there, though. We had to cancel our vacation, and we were both stressed about money. My wife decided to take on extra hours at work to help cover the costs, and I picked up some side jobs on weekends. It was tough, but we were determined to get through it together. As we worked through these challenges, I started to see a change in my wife. She was more involved in the household issues and took on more responsibility. She even started tracking the weather and helping me with the pipes during the cold months. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. One night, while we were sitting in our newly fixed laundry room, my wife told me about her childhood. She grew up in a house where her dad did everything, and her mom never had to worry about anything. She realized that she had been expecting the same dynamic in our marriage without even thinking about it. She apologized for not being more considerate and promised to be more involved. I also shared some of my own feelings. I told her about the pressure I felt to keep everything running smoothly and how it made me feel like I was failing when things went wrong. We both agreed to be more open and supportive of each other. But just when we thought things were getting better, we had another setback. The contractor who fixed the drywall called us with bad news. He found more mold in the ceiling, which meant we had to tear down part of the roof to fix it. This was another huge expense, and we were both devastated. We had a choice to make. We could either fix the roof and go further into debt, or we could sell the house and start fresh somewhere else. It was a hard decision, but we decided to sell the house. It was heartbreaking, but we knew it was the best option for our future. We put the house on the market and started looking for a new place to live. It was a stressful time, but we leaned on each other for support. We found a smaller, more manageable house that didn't need any major repairs. It wasn't our dream home, but it was a fresh start. As we packed up our things and prepared to move, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. I was sad to leave the house where we had so many memories, but I was also hopeful for the future. My wife and I had been through a lot, but we were stronger for it. Thanks for reading. Am I the idiot for refusing to let my mother-in-law hijack my fiance's graduation ceremony and getting banned from attending? For context, my fiance, 19-year-old male, and I, 19-year-old female, have been together for over a year, but have known each other for 15 years. We grew up together due to my mother-in-law and my parents being good friends. The timeline goes, we got engaged in December 2023, he signed his Army contract in March 2024, got shipped out in April 2024, is set to graduate from basic military training in June 2024, then advanced individual training in September 2024. I've maintained a civil relationship with my mother-in-law and father-in-law, and it's gone well for the last year. I've known my mother-in-law for a long time, but I hadn't met my father-in-law until ID 2023. Male, they've been divorced for a very long time. The issue started last week when I got in contact with my father-in-law about the graduation, and he told me that he didn't want me or my parents to go. I needed to go with my mom, dad, because I can't rent a car, get a hotel under 21, because it's too personal to share the day with anyone else. He also said the day was too important to him, and that since my fiance and I are so young, we have time together when he comes back from advanced individual training. Of course, this upset me, but I didn't respond to him. I didn't want to possibly say something disrespectful or cause more drama. It got resolved the next day when my mother-in-law and my mom discussed the issue, and I was going to travel with my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law talked to my father-in-law about being chill about me tagging along. Now on to the current issue with my mother-in-law. She's a boy mom and used to being the most important woman to her husband and kids, which is fair. I'm not going to take away that she's their mom. However, I'm not going to take any disrespect. I had my weekly phone call with my fiance where he tells me that my mother-in-law was complaining about the tap out and that she wanted to do it even though she knew that my fiance wanted it to be me. In that moment, my mother-in-law texts me informing me that she wanted to be the one to tap him out and that even if I wanted to, it's what she wants. I responded hours later where I only said that my fiance wanted me to do it, so what were we going to do? She quickly got on the offensive and says that she's his mom, and because of that, it's going to be her, and that's it, no more arguing. She also lied about my fiance telling her to say that when it wasn't true, because he and I were on the phone when she initially texted me. Anyways, since she said no more arguing, I didn't text back, until my father-in-law sends me another message. He texts me telling me that he didn't support certain things about my relationship with his son, and that she's his mother who birthed him, and it's her right to do the honors, and that after this message, there's no more contest. I don't know who's initiating any kind of competition or contest because it certainly isn't me. I've remained respectful and polite. But after these conversations, I decided to back out of traveling with my mother-in-law and make my own travel arrangements. Clearly, I am disturbing the peace, so I'll travel alone to stay out of the way. I know when she sees my text, she'll have something, probably not so nice to say. Am I the jerk for choosing to travel on my own for my fiance's Army graduation? Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Not the idiot, and right now is when you and your fiance have to establish that you are his priority. Father-in-law and mother-in-law are not, and he's the one who has to deal with this and put up this boundary. Good for you for not being a doormat. Comment 2. Not the idiot. Also, if you have USAA, or if your job has a travel portal, or if you are willing to pay a young driver fee, you can rent a car under the age of 21. Now, for the update. Hey everyone, a lot has happened since my last post. After deciding to make my own travel arrangements, I booked a flight and a hotel room near the base. I figured it would be easier to avoid any more drama with my mother-in-law and father-in-law. I was nervous about traveling alone, but I felt it was the best decision for everyone involved. The first mistake I made was not informing my fiancé about my new travel plans. I thought it would be a nice surprise for him to see me there, but it turned out to be a huge mistake. When I arrived at the base, I found out that my mother-in-law had already informed the base officials that she would be the one tapping him out. They had strict rules about who could be present during the ceremony, and since my name wasn't on the list, I wasn't allowed to attend. I was devastated. I tried calling my fiancé, but he didn't have his phone on him during training. I waited outside the base hoping to catch a glimpse of him, but I never did. I felt so alone and helpless. I ended up spending the night in my hotel room, crying and feeling like a complete failure. The next day, I finally got a call from my fiancé. He was confused and upset when he found out I wasn't at the ceremony. I explained everything to him, and he was furious with his mother. He told me he would talk to her and try to sort things out, but I could tell he was just as hurt as I was. A few days later, my fiancé called me again. He said he had spoken to his mother, and she admitted that she had intentionally left my name off the list. She claimed it was for the best, as she didn't want any more drama. My fiancé was livid and told her that he didn't want her to be a part of his life if she couldn't respect our relationship. This caused a huge rift between them, and my fiancé was left feeling torn between his family and me. As if things couldn't get any worse, my father-in-law decided to get involved again. He called me and accused me of trying to ruin their family. He said that I was being selfish and that I should have just let my mother-in-law have her moment. I tried to explain my side of the story, but he wouldn't listen. He hung up on me, leaving me feeling even more isolated and misunderstood. The fallout from this whole situation has been immense. My fiancé and his mother are barely speaking, and my relationship with my father-in-law is completely shattered. My own parents are supportive, but they don't really understand the depth of the pain I'm feeling. I feel like I'm stuck in the middle of a war that I never wanted to be a part of. In the midst of all this chaos, I started to reflect on my relationship with my fiance. We've known each other for so long, but I realized that we never really talked about how we would handle conflicts with our families. I always assumed that our love would be enough to get us through anything, but now I'm not so sure. I worry that this situation has caused irreparable damage to our relationship. I also started to think about my own family dynamics. My parents have always been supportive and loving, but they've never had to deal with anything like this. I wonder if they would be able to handle the pressure if the roles were reversed. It's made me question a lot about my own upbringing and how it has shaped my expectations for relationships. One thing that has become clear to me is that my mother-in-law has always been very controlling. I remember when we were kids, she would always dictate what games we played and how we spent our time together. I never thought much of it back then, but now I see that it's a pattern of behavior that has continued into adulthood. She has a hard time letting go and allowing her son to make his own decisions. My fiance has also shared some stories from his childhood that have given me more insight into his mother's behavior. He told me about how she would always insist on being involved in every aspect of his life, even when he didn't want her to be. He said that he always felt like he had to please her, even if it meant sacrificing his own happiness. This has made me realize that our current situation is just a continuation of that dynamic. As for my father-in-law, I don't know much about his past, but I can see that he has a lot of unresolved issues with his ex-wife. I think that his anger towards me is really just a reflection of his own frustrations with her. It's sad to see how their toxic relationship has affected everyone around them, including my fiance and me. In the end, I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with my fiance. I love him deeply, but I can't ignore the fact that his family has caused so much pain and stress. I worry that this will always be a source of tension between us, and I'm not sure if we can overcome it. Thank you for reading. If you like this video, you'll probably like these too. Also, while you're here, please consider subscribing. It's your support that keeps this channel alive and allows me to make better and longer videos. Have a great day.